Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Rob from Rob's Game Group, and welcome to another episode of A Look at the Book. This is episode 17, and this week we are taking a look at White Box, fantastic medieval adventure game. So, what is it? First, let's discuss that. White Box is another OSR retro clone of early D&D. From the intro in the book and what information I have been able to gather about it online, doing my own research, it seems to be a OSR retro clone of an OSR retro clone called was it Swords and Wizardry, that is a retro clone of early D&D. And when I say early D&D, this one has more of a feel of like the original 3 pamphlet set for D&D. Now I could be wrong about some of that, but that's just what came from the inside of the box. And if you know more about White Box or its history, feel free to put it down in the comments, because I'm always interested in learning more about these games. So, you can get this in various covers. This is the cover I chose, or the one that was available on Amazon when I got it, but it was the one that I liked the best. But there are several different retro style covers, and I thought that was beautiful. If I can get the glare off of it so you can see it good. That's just a gorgeous cover. When I say it seems to be based off of the earliest version of D&D. It still uses the Open Gaming License to do this, and it still has some aspects of later versions of D&D in it. And that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to take a look at it and see if this is something that's right for you. So the book opens up with a little introduction talking about why he retro-cloned this game. The number one rule, it talks about, like most of them, the dice, and about optional rules. Then it talks about your attributes, which are definitely done differently in here than they are in later versions of D&D and even in basic fantasy. You have a chart in here that goes from low, average, and high on your attributes. So a 3 to 6 is considered low, and that modifier would be a -1. 7 to 14 is average and would be a modifier of 0. 15 to 18 is considered high and would be a modifier of +1. And these modifiers do what they generally do in versions of D&D, or other retro clones for that matter. A +1 to strength is going to add to hit and damage with melee weapons, so on and so forth. A +1 to dex is going to add to your AC, or reduce your AC, depends on which AC version you use. It talks about the experience. It breaks down strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dex, and charisma, and how they work, or what they represent. The hit points in the game, or hit dice and hit points, are determined across the board using a D6, which is very old school. But it also keeps everything very simple. There is no varying in the type of hit dice. This is old D&D, where it uses a D20 for attacking and a lot of D6s, and that's pretty much it. This one, as opposed to basic fantasy, and I'm not really trying to do a comparison between the two, it's just the two that I'm most familiar with, but this one does include alignment. You have law, chaos, and neutrality in here. I don't personally care for alignment. I never have. So that, even if I ran this, it would be an optional thing. And then it talks about character retirement. So when we get into the classes, it starts with the classic classes. You have the cleric in the beginning, And I love the artwork in this book. It's all very consistent. And I want to say it's done by the same person. We have one person who did the cover art, Eric Lofgren. And interior art is all done by a William McAuslin. And you can tell that the interior art is pretty much the same across the board. But you have your description for the cleric. Each of the classes also has their charts. This is the turn undead chart for the cleric. And you'll notice that they have all of their main information that you're going to need when leveling up right here on one chart. So your experience, points required for each level, hit dice that you get, which it just lists the number of hit dice because they're all D6, and occasionally you'll get a +1. Your to hit modifier, your saving throws, and your number of spells. All of that's listed on here in one place in the book, and that's something that I think this game does right. It definitely is nice to have all of that information in one place instead of having to flip it back and forth through the book looking for it. You have the fighter on the next page. Again, some more beautiful old school black and white art with his chart. You have the magic user, which eventually at level 10 becomes a witch or a wizard, if they survive that long. Let's see, then you have the thief, which was always optional and is optional in here. But again, some very old reminiscent artwork. And then we go into character races. Excuse me just a minute. My apologies, I forgot to turn my phone down, and I don't need that thing sitting and going off the whole time we're doing this video. But then you go into races, and you have the dwarf with a cool picture. You have the elf and the halfling, which doesn't get a very big picture. He's in there. He's down there hanging out by the bottom of that tree. It's just really hard to see. Now, this is something that they do in this and other retro clones I've seen that is more of a modern take on D&D, because originally, not just in the old pamphlets, but even in the old red box, your halfling, your dwarf, and your elf were considered a race. They were not, or excuse me, they were considered a class, not a race. They were demi-humans. They were distant cousins of humans, and as such, they had their own abilities and everything, just like a normal class would. And I always thought that was weird. Even as a kid, I thought that was weird that they weren't a race and a class. And then later on, of course, races and classes got broke up. But in a lot of these retro clones, they do that now. They break up the races and classes, and that's what you have in here. It goes from there to equipment, which in the equipment it has a fairly small but sufficient chart of things for people to buy, and then transportation. The cost is just all listed in gold pieces. And then we look at weapons. Now, weapons here again, this is a very old school thing. All the weapons are 1d6. They might be 1d6 plus something, not just your strength modifier, but depending on the type of weapon, it might be a 1d6 plus 1, it might be a 1d6, it might be a 1d6 negative 1, like a dagger. And then, of course, your strength modifier could apply to that as well. But everything was done with d6s. You have your hiring assistance chart in here, and your table for armor class. And most of the retro clones that I have glanced through, there are a few that don't. They still use THAC0, but the one that is mine of choice, obviously, I've said in other videos, is Basic Fantasy, because it has the Ascending Armor class. I like Ascending Armor class. Yeah, I don't know. It's just easier to explain it to people, and they don't have to look stuff up on a chart. But if you like Descending Armor Class, or the to-hit Armor Class 0, which is commonly known as THAC0, they present both ways of doing it in here. So you can choose which way you want. You want AAC, Ascending Armor Class, or you want THAC0, to hit Armor Class 0. You can choose which way you like it. Just how old school do you want to go? Then we get into a section on playing the game. Gaining experience, time, movement, movement by race, outdoor movement, dungeon doors, lights, listening at doors, secret doors, traps. Note on finding secret doors and traps. Combat is what it goes into next. And combat starts with initiative. And initiative does work very old school in this. A lot of your modern players don't realize it, but it did used to be the DM would roll for his monsters or bad guys, and then somebody on the player side would roll a d6 for their side, and whoever got the highest, that side went first. It wasn't necessarily by each person like it is today. And even some of the retro clones that are out today use the person by person initiative. I personally really like the doing initiative by sides, but it's just that's just a personal preference thing. You have a lot of information in here on ascending and descending armor classes and attack rolls and how they work. Healing, running out of hit points, reaching 0 and being dead. Invisible opponents, blinding wounds, oil, melee attacks, missile attacks, morale, negotiation, diplomacy, jousting, spells, loyalty, saving throws. And then you have the saving throw matrix for those who want to play more old school, which I actually like. I like both ways. They have two different versions. They have the classic, which is where you have a saving throw matrix, all this big chart, and your saving throws change per level for death and poison, wands, raise, paralyze, stone, dragon's breath, spells, and staves. And that's what I currently use. But this version also offers the single saving throw, which is where you just have a single saving throw number, and regardless of what type of saving throw you're trying to make, you just have to beat that. I actually do kind of like that. I haven't used that, but I like the thought of that because it allows you to use saving throws for things that maybe aren't on this chart that you want to use a saving throw for. So that's pretty cool. Then it has a section reminding you that White Box is a freeform role-playing game, meaning that there aren't very many rules and the referee is responsible for handling most situations, so on and so forth. But then we go into spells and magic with more cool art. I'm an art guy, so anything, art is a big thing for me, and it will play a role in what I think of a game. Your spells, you have cleric spells and magic user spells in here, and they are listed in the first part of the magic section. They only go up to 6th level because this game only goes up to about 10th level. So one of the things I noticed right away, and I didn't start with the old 3 pamphlets, I started with the red box. So I had to go back and look this up, and I have read through the old pamphlets, and oh God, if you haven't, go back and read that sometime. You can find them online. It is comical the way this game was designed back in the day. There's parts of me, there's times where I read it and I'm just surprised this game ever took off. For instance, originally it was like, this game is for 3 to 50 players. Oh my God, I would never want 50 players. But, to make it easier, they were like, well, you should probably have a referee or a dungeon master for every 20 players or so. I don't want to run a game with 20 players. Ever. That's a nightmare, in my opinion. But one of the things I had to go back and look up was the fact that my favorite low-level magic user spells seemed to be missing from the level 1 chart. Magic Missile was nowhere to be seen. And after going back and looking at the old pamphlets, I realized it wasn't in there, so it was something that was added later on. And being as this seems to be based off of that, maybe that's why it's not in there, but it never shows up on the magic user list in here. And I find that a little disheartening because magic users, especially early on, kind of get the shaft. And I think they need every bit of help they can get. And not having access to magic missile as something to defend yourself with early on is scary to me. I don't think I would play a magic user in this version of the game. But again, this is trying to achieve a very particular style of game that I didn't grow up playing. I grew up with the red box and the blue box and so on and so forth. So, if you did grow up playing it that way, you might be okay with that. Again, that's just a personal pet peeve. But then we have our spells listed in here, which you can see what I mean because they're very limited. Like level, magic user 5, range, referee's discretion, duration permanent. So the referee or DM can basically just decide a lot of things on your spells. There's a whole lot of hand waving in old school D&D. But let's move on past the spells. Then you enter a running the game chapter. Again, more beautiful artwork. And creating a campaign, experience points, scale and advancement, underworld and wilderness adventures, wandering monsters, reaction checks, and then tables for wandering monsters. Or land movement, encounter levels, wandering monsters, and the types of wandering monsters per level you can throw out there. There's several pages of that. Then we come to the actual monster section in the book, which is, it actually begins on page 81 with the monster descriptions and goes all the way to page 112, giving you a total of 104 monsters. So that's not bad. That's a nice little selection of monsters to get going with in the game. So then we go into the treasure chapter towards the end of the book, chapter 9. And, it's what you would expect. It's charts on how many gold pieces they find. Everything is in gold pieces. And then we move into magic potions, scrolls, scroll descriptions, magic weapons and armor, miscellaneous magic weapons, wands, lesser rings, greater rings, staves, lesser miscellaneous magic items, medium miscellaneous magic items, and greater miscellaneous magic items, which are your more named things, bags of holding, stuff like that. One of the neat things I thought they did in here was the deck of many things is listed out, and it has a description for how to use regular poker cards to represent an actual deck of many things. So if you really want to destroy your campaign that you've worked very hard on, introduce this magic item. It'll generally get it done for you. I've never had it happen and it'd be a good idea. And then that finishes up with cursed items. And then we reach the end of the book where you have a page for writing your own house rules, which is nice. And the very retro cool style character sheet that they have in here. You can also download this. And then the open game license in the end. And from the back of the book, unleash your imagination to dream of other worlds where you roleplay heroic characters and go on adventures, just like the days of old. Slay a dragon. Sometimes even the most reluctant adventurer will hear the call of the wilderness and set out to slay a dragon or at least steal its treasure. Explore the unknown. There is no limit to the lands you can explore with magic you can discover. Fight on, so grab your sword, mace, or wand and travel beyond the borderlands and brace yourself to face great and terrible monsters. And remember, no matter what happens, fight on. This is put out by Seattle Hill Games. It is sword and wizardry compatible and has the OSR logo right there. Alright, so I'll be taking a look here, going over, I've got some notes that I made on stuff in the book. I'm going to run over that real quick and then give you my final conclusion on what I think of it. Okay, so like I said, this whole video is taking a look at the white box game, and you can get it in various covers. The early design does show through with the hit dice being just D6 and with varying numbers of hit dice and or bonuses depending on your class. Damage for all weapons being based on D6s. AC is presented, like I said, in both the THACO and the AC or AAC ascending armor class style, so you can use the one that you like. Early versions of D&D listed the halfling, elf, and dwarf as classes of demi-humans. This does split them into races, so if you're really wanting them to be classes, then you should probably go get the rule cyclopedia, because I'm pretty sure there's still classes in it. Each class in here also has a couple of special abilities that set them apart from each other. So like your cleric has turn undead, but they also eventually get establish a temple. The fighter has combat fury and eventually establish a stronghold. The magic user has their spellcasting ability, and eventually they become a witch or a wizard and establish a tower. The thief has 3. They have the backstab, thievery, and eventually establishing a guild. I do like that level progression for XP, hit dice, to hit numbers, saves, and more are all on one chart for each class, and I don't have to flip back and forth through the book to find them. That is kudos. That's awesome. I like that saving throws allow you to use either the single saving throw number or the old matrix. At the end of the day, this is another retro clone of D&D. And as with all of them, it's best to look at how it is presented and decide if it is right for you and your group. It may not be my retro clone of choice, but it may be exactly what you're looking for. And again, I'm not taking anything away from it. I haven't looked at every retro clone. I've looked at a couple. I've looked at Blue Home. I've looked at obviously Basic Fantasy and this, and I've read about a couple of other ones, but I haven't really looked into them. Basic Fantasy is mine of choice, but I have my own reasons for that in videos that I've already done. I'm not saying I would never have played this. I think that a lot of love went into this book. So I will start there and list some positive aspects to this game, even though I may not be likely to play it. So first of all, I like the size. It's, I don't know, maybe it's considered digest size, but most of the digest size I've seen are a little bit bigger than this. This is almost a perfect bound pocket size. I mean, I could slip this into the pocket of my cargo shorts and take it with me if I'm going to the doctor and I'm going to be sitting in the waiting room for a while. So I do like the size of it. I like the binding. It is perfect bound and it's done really well. It's very sturdy. The price. What is not to like about the price? On average, you can get this exact cover off of Amazon for between $4 and $7. It's not very expensive. And being able to get a complete game for under $10, that's pretty good. The production quality. The production quality on this book is outstanding. I think it's done really, really well. I was very impressed with it. And like I said, even though I may not play this particular version, because it really has nothing to do with a dislike of this. It's just I have a version of old school D&D that I like in Basic Fantasy, so how many different versions of the same game do I really need? I mean, I still probably won't play 5th edition anymore. In fact, the only one that I might actually try out would be the Savage Worlds Pathfinder crossover, just because I'm curious to see how they handled it. But yeah, production quality is amazing on this. The consistent art style where they only used one artist, and I'm not saying books have to use just one artist, but the consistent art style that they used and the artist they picked, absolutely phenomenal in my opinion. The rules are very clean, very clear. You can buy this, and it, unlike some of, because if you go back and read some of those old pamphlets of D&D, that's some convoluted crap, man. It's hard to muddle through, and especially if you're somebody who is not fluent, I guess, in a lot of D&D rule-heavy type games. So, to conclude, if you're looking for the right OSR retro clone for you, maybe this is it. I suggest you check it out because for $4 to $7, it's interesting to read and see what they did with this, and I'm happy to have it in my collection where it's going to stay. So I hope that you found something useful out of this, whether it's you've decided that this is something you're going to use or not going to use. But either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would like to thank all of my current subscribers, and especially the ones that we've been picking up lately. It's been growing pretty quick from my channel. And thank you all for subscribing. If you have not, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Definitely hit that like button because that's what helps share the video around. If you would like to communicate with us more, or me personally, send questions or whatever, you can find us on Facebook at Rob's Game Group, all one word. And that's all I've got on taking a look at the book for this week. Until next week, good gaming and good luck.